Welcome, everybody. Monday, July 10th. John Aravosis here with the Aravosis Report, here to talk to you about the latest news from Ukraine. As always, let me get TikTok rolling here on my iPad, and then we'll take a minute or two just for you guys to introduce yourselves while we are waiting for people to arrive. Okay, there goes TikTok. Excellent. Boom. Okay. Hello, all. Jens in Sweden. Special. Well, we're almost there for Sweden. Almost there. So we're going to definitely talk. That'll be our big story, of course, among other stories today. Anyway, welcome all. Woo! Another hot day in DC. Hey, Radoslav. Oh, I'm tired of the weather being hot. Washington is basically at that spot now. Thank you, B. Smith, where it just gets hot and stays hot until September, which I hate. Oh, anyway, I want it to be like 80s, not 90s. Anyway, I'm going to yawn. I had tea too. I shouldn't be tired. Hey, Tom. Oh, it's just like hot day, I think. That's the problem. Hey, Alberta. Oh, introduce yourselves, guys. Exactly. Just follow the lead. Say where you guys are all from. I'm in Washington, D.C., by the way. I think I said. But yes, it is hot and balmy here, although a little bit better than it's been, but still. Bleh, bleh. Anyway, we're going to take another minute just waiting for folks to arrive, and then we will start the news from Ukraine. Well, the news about Ukraine from Washington, that is. Swedish kid. Wisconsin, I know it's going to be like 80s the next 2 days and then back to 90s for eternity. Thank you, inspired woman. I know I need that tea. Oh, I do have like a cider in the fridge, but if I have the cider, it's alcoholic, and I'll just start forgetting things. So we wouldn't like that anyway. All right, guys. I think I'm ready to start. So welcome, everybody. John Aravosis here from Washington, D.C., here to talk about the latest news from Ukraine. The big story today, of course, is Sweden getting one very big step closer to joining NATO. We'll talk about Ukraine's chances as well. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. I'm going to yawn today. This is crazy. I had tea. I should not be yawning. Thank you, Mr. R. And succeed. All the gifts flying in on TikTok as always. Thank you, folks. Thank you, everybody. Blah. Thank you, Mr. Russell. So the way the show works, you guys know, I talk for the first half of the show. I cover the news. Thank you, Mr. R. And for the second half of the show, thank you, Cami. I will be taking your questions. Thank you, LWD, for the money gun. I always try to thank you guys when you do the gifts on TikTok and YouTube. Thank you for the life, for the heart. And basically, what was I going to say? Thanks, Poppy. Oh, yeah, the gifts. Well, the gifts matter because I've been doing this for free since the war broke out. It is my full-time job. And the way I'm able to keep doing this is you guys, in essence, are paying my salary with these gifts, among other things. So please keep them coming. And thank you so much. I appreciate that. So on TikTok, I will always do a shout out when I see the gifts. And on YouTube, I will always do a shout out when I see the super chat and super stickers. Thank you, LWD. And what was I going to say? Oh, and also super chat questions on TikTok. I will always get to those as the next thing I talk about, even if we're not in the Q&A section. Your super chat question I'll get to immediately as a thank you for supporting me. So let's get to work here. It is day 501 of Vladimir Putin's 3-day special military operation. Thank you, Big Hawk. Biden arrived today in Vilnius, Lithuania. That's a I told you guys I'm going to yawn at you. I can't believe I'm yawning. I may pour myself a little bit more iced tea. I shouldn't be tired, but for some reason I'm tired all of a sudden. Biden arrived in Vilnius, Lithuania today for the NATO summit that starts tomorrow. Late breaking, very good news on that front. Turkey has agreed to support Sweden's accession to NATO. As you may recall, in order to join NATO, it must be unanimous among all the members because NATO, my allergies are going off today and my eyes are watering. I'm crying. I'm so excited about Sweden. No, in order to join NATO, every member has got to accept you because every member is going to have to defend you if war breaks out. At least in principle, that's the way it works, right? So it's got to be unanimous. All the parliaments and congresses of all the allies have to get together. So far, or I should say what's been outstanding has been Turkey and Hungary. Now, Turkey, thank you, Nicholas. Erdogan came through and said he's on board. Basically they bribed him. They didn't bribe him personally, but they bribed him with probably U.S. weapons is the best guess. Publicly, they're saying, thank you, Marcy. Publicly, they're saying things like, oh, NATO will now have a special coordinator for counterterrorism. And Turkey was very excited about that. Oh, yeah, I'm sure he was. And Sweden will help push for Turkey to join the EU. Again, means absolutely nothing. Clearly, it's the U.S. giving Turkey weapons. We don't know about it yet, but Turkey's been trying to get this $20 billion with a B dollar F-16 deal from the U.S. Clearly, either that's gone through or something even better. Thank you, Elizabeth. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Let me see here. Oh, Hungary. Okay, so this gets interesting, though. Thank you, John S., for the gift. So Hungary becomes the interesting thing because Hungary now is the only party holding out. Now, up until now, Hungary had indicated that they wouldn't be the only country to hold up Sweden's membership, right, in NATO. They said basically if everyone else came along, they would come along. Oh, thank you, Archer. Oh, sorry, guys. I am going to get that iced tea in about 2 seconds, I think. They said that they would come along if everybody else comes along. And just last week, let me find this. Just last week, Hungary's foreign minister said that Budapest would not obstruct Sweden's bid alone. If there is a shift in Turkey's stance, then of course we will keep the promise that Hungary will not hold up any country in terms of membership, he told reporters last week. That's according to the Washington Post. That's pretty definitive. Now, of course, Hungary's prime minister can just change his mind. He's the guy that's super pro-Putin and may try to jerk around with this. But let's hope. Honestly, I think in the next day, we should hear, if not tonight or tomorrow, although tonight's already nighttime, so it's probably too late for tonight. Thank you, Chief, for the heart. But tomorrow, we really ought to hear something from Hungary restating the fact that, yeah, we're not going to stand in the way. Now, it still requires a vote in the parliament in Turkey and Hungary. In Turkey, Erdogan has already promised the vote will go through, and the way he controls that country, I'm sure it will. Hungary, I doubt will be a problem. Thank you, Azamak. And then once that happens, my nose is going to itch too. They pass the protocols that are ratified by the parliament to the U.S. State Department for whatever reason, and then it kind of magically happens. They join NATO. There'll be a ceremony, etc. So this could happen. This could happen very soon. Hungary is a part of NATO. That is why, yes, PB&J, that is why Hungary has been vetoing or had the ability to veto Sweden and I believe Finland too. For a short while, Hungary was being a problem. Turkey certainly was. But every NATO member has to agree to a new member joining, and they do it via their parliaments in their country or their Congress in their country. Thank you for the boxing robe there, Alistair. Let me see what else we got here. Oh, Erdogan. So another interesting thing. So first of all, Putin not going to be happy because this is one step closer to Sweden joining NATO. That would make NATO 32 members, but also it would really close the gap in terms of the sort of block all along Russia's borders or near Russia's borders of NATO countries, especially in the Baltic up there, Scandinavians, etc. Putin's not going to be happy. Going into the war, the polls, I'd have to pull these up again to see what the polls were, but the polls I remember were really bad in both Sweden and Finland when the war in Ukraine broke out. So we're talking February 24th, 2022, February of last year. Putin invades Ukraine, and right before that, the Swedes and the Finns have no desire to join NATO. Well, Putin invades. Both countries freak out. Support for NATO goes way above 50%, and Finland is now a member, and Sweden is like one step from there. Thank you, Hazel. Putin cannot be happy about this, especially because he claimed he was invading Ukraine because NATO was getting too big and too close to his borders. Total lie. NATO hadn't been expanding in a long time as far as that goes. Thank you, Verna. And Ukraine, forget it. Ukraine was stalled. Ukraine in 2008 asked to join NATO. As of 2022, their bid was totally stalled. It had been 14 years. It was going nowhere. So Putin lied. But what's ironic about this is Putin claimed he invaded to stop NATO from expanding, and he forced NATO to expand. I mean, crazy. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, Andy Cat is saying 70% support for NATO in Sweden. And I want to recall, I was just going to say, like Pedro's saying it was like 30 to 35%, jumping to 80, 85% in Finland. I remember something similar in Sweden. The polls were just not good before, and they went through the roof because basically people got scared and they saw that, Russia was back. The bad Russia was back, right? Very interesting. So the other thing, thank you, Adventures, for the gift. The other thing that happens this weekend that Erdogan, the president of Turkey, does that's really going to piss off Putin. Zelensky has been doing this tour, right, visiting a number of countries before the big NATO summit this week, where latest news is he will be attending. And he meets with Erdogan, and Erdogan turns over to him a bunch of prisoners of war from the war with Russia. Well, what happened was, remember the men and women from the Azov battalion of Ukraine that were defending the steel plant, the Azovstal steel plant, all the way down in Mariupol? Show you on my handy dandy map. Mariupol all the way down here. And this was a battle that went on for about 2 months. Hey, Denise, good to see you again in Kyiv. This was a battle that went on for about 2 months. And remember, 2,000 Ukrainians, oh, thank you, Cheryl. 2,000 Ukrainian troops held off 14,000 Russian troops for 2 months. I mean, amazing job these guys did. Well, the Russians, of course, embarrassed as hell, didn't want to basically turn these guys over in any prisoner of war swap. Also, the Russians kept claiming that these guys were Nazis. They kept saying, remember, one of Russia's big thing about getting in the war was, oh, Ukraine is a Nazi country and we must overthrow the evil blah, 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 right? This kind of BS. Well, they especially claimed the Azov guys were Nazis. And they said this, and I don't want to use the word too much because I always worry about TikTok's little censor kicking in. Thank you, Manda Bear. But basically, Azov did have a history going back to like 2014 of having some really disreputable people, including the ultra far right national, the crazy people. Thank you, Verna. They got rid of that. They got rid of it in order to be able to integrate in the Ukrainian army. Ukraine got the message, and Azov had to get rid of all the crazies. So they are no longer the same group they were 10 years ago, which is good. But in any case, so fast forward to now. Thank you, Ali. Fast forward to today. This weekend, Zelensky goes to Turkey. Thank you, Gene. Goes to Turkey. And what happens? But Erdogan, the Turkish president, turns over 5 of the Azov battalion commanders to Zelensky to take home with him. Now, Turkey had brokered this weird deal, thank you, Nico, with Russia, where Putin wasn't going to let the Azov prisoners go back to Ukraine. He insisted they stay in Turkey for the rest of the war. Like, it was crazy. Like, everybody else, we could exchange prisoners back and forth, but not the Azov guys, because basically Putin had to save face, because Putin had to say, right, I mean, Putin was claiming these guys were Nazis, and that the whole reason he invaded, he can't just turn them over, although he did, in fact, end up turning over a number of the Azov guys for prisoner exchanges, but not the commanders. Well, Erdogan goes, the leader of Turkey goes, and he turns these 5 commanders, these Ukrainian commanders, over to Zelensky to bring home to Ukraine, even though Putin told him not to. I mean, the condition of these guys being in Turkey was that Russia would give them to Turkey, but Turkey could not let them go back to Ukraine until the war was over. Turkey let them go home anyway. I mean, it was like, I can't do the snap thing with my fingers like, poof. It was a dicky thing for Erdogan to do. We're happy though. Thank you, 863. Very happy he did it, but a very jerky kind of in your face thing for Erdogan to do to Putin. And then what happens? Like a day or two later, Erdogan comes through and supports Sweden joining NATO. Thank you, McFadge, for the whale. Very nice. We'll give you the wave. So very, very interesting just on the whole Erdogan Putin thing. And frankly, it's just one more thing that shows that how, like, for Putin, this war keeps going worse and worse and worse. Let me see what else I've got here. Oh, so for Ukraine and Zelensky. Okay, so the other big deal with the NATO summit this week is obviously Ukraine wants to join NATO. And even though Zelensky himself has said before that, thank you, LWD, Zelensky himself has publicly admitted that he understands it might not be possible for Ukraine to join NATO while the war is going on. And the idea is just that if Ukraine's at war with Turkey, I was going to say, if Ukraine's, oh, thank you, Ike. That's a cute one. Thank you. And a very nice one. If Ukraine joins NATO while Ukraine is at war with Russia, then NATO would be at war with Russia. So they can't do it, right? I mean, NATO's got to hold off and wait until the war ends is the concept. Even Zelensky says he kind of gets that, right? But Zelensky wanted some kind of promise. Thank you, Andy. Wanted some kind of a promise of a timeline, of something to show that NATO was serious and not just go back to where we were 14 years ago, where NATO said, oh, yes, someday that would be nice. And it's been 14 years. The latest news on that was supposedly NATO this happened like in the last hour or two, I think, or last couple hours. Supposedly NATO is going to forego the membership action plan that members normally have to, thank you, Marcy, that members normally have to present and work off of. It's just that it's like a plan with like check boxes that you have to achieve to move forward. I don't know what the actual impact of that is. I haven't seen anybody yet sort of talk about whether that means, I just don't know. I mean, Purnell is saying over on Facebook that Zelensky's looking for a pathway. I mean, yes, he is. The thing is, I'm not sure what that pathway is. Well, let me rephrase that. I think what Ukraine's looking for is NATO to tell it, what the F do you want? Right? I mean, okay, if it's the war ending, fine. A, the war has to be over. B, your military has to do X, Y, and Z to be NATO compatible. C, you've got to have these reforms to your democracy, because we only let democracies into NATO, although obviously Turkey and Hungary are playing games with that aspect. But you have to have reforms to your judiciary, reforms to your parliament, reforms to your presidency. I don't know, right? But basically, and I don't know that I doubt they'd have anything economic they demand, but you'd have to have these steps. And literally, if you make all of these steps, then we will submit your name to all the NATO members and they will all vote. But we promise that we, America, Britain, whoever, France, will support your membership. Something like that, right? And I don't think that's going to happen. Thank you, Louis. Biden went on TV Sunday, here in the States, was interviewed by CNN, and he gave what I thought was kind of a shitty interview. And it's interesting because, I was talking with some of the guys. We have a Discord community that's very good, by the way. You should discord.aravosis.com. You guys should visit. It's free. And we were talking, I think yesterday or the day before, some stories came out from Financial Times, among others. Financial Times, very good British paper. Financial Times was saying that the Americans and the Germans were the ones who really were putting kind of the roadblocks up to Ukraine moving forward and joining NATO. And I always suspected it was the US, Biden. I suspected it was Germany or France. I told you guys. I'm intrigued that it's not France. Interesting. But Germany and the US, according to the Financial Times. Now, we were having a little bit of a debate on the Discord with some of the Germans on the Discord saying, look, our government has made really positive statements about Ukraine joining NATO, but we've said there's got to be democracy and blah, blah, blah. But, basically we've said these following steps, but otherwise we're open to it. Biden said the same thing, but Biden, being Biden, said it a little more honestly. And when he was pushed by Fareed Zakaria of CNN on this, Biden didn't say, of course, Ukraine will be a member of NATO. I mean, the appropriate answer should have been, of course, Ukraine will be a member of NATO. Of course. We welcome them and it will happen. But there are a series of steps they have to take, which all NATO members take, and they know that, and everyone knows it. And, we're going to work with them on what those steps are and making sure they achieve them. And when they do, we're going to welcome them with open arms. Boom. That's all you had to say. And that would go in line with what the previous German statements kind of were. Well, Biden goes, well, I mean, typical Biden, and I'm saying typical meaning because he's always talking this way about Ukraine and NATO, focusing on the war instead. NATO right now, not until the war is over. And even then, a lot has to happen. I mean, they're democracy. He's giving all these naysaying reasons. He's not saying, oh, no, we're on board. There's a checklist, blah, blah. No, he's giving all these negative reasons about why it wouldn't be a good idea. And, I've got to hold NATO together, and he's, in other words, now he's saying it would pull NATO apart if we were to try to let Ukraine in. And you're going, well, that sounds a little different to me. Thank you, Courtney. That sounds a little different than, oh, we're waiting for NATO for Ukraine to achieve the following four things, right? When he's going, it would pull NATO apart. I'm like, what do you mean pull NATO apart? Biden, I am telling you guys, this is my Cassandra moment. I've told you, I am Cassandra of Greek mythology, and I've been gifted with the gift of foresight by the gods, but I have been damned that nobody will believe me, but maybe you'll believe me. Biden is afraid of Putin. Biden has done a great job. Look, I'm not gonna deal with folks who sit there and say Biden sucks and blah, blah, blah. Biden does not suck. Biden has done a great job on this war, but from day one, he's been afraid of Putin, and he has shown that. And I think, I am not going to knock him for being careful, but I think he's too afraid of Putin and he's too afraid of escalation. And he thinks once again that Ukraine joining NATO is going to be escalation. I mean, the Russians, of course, love this. The Russians, I wasn't even going to mention their statement to you today. I didn't even write it down, but I read it before the show. The Russians put out another, oh, by the way, it was another statement. And who do you think issued the statement about Ukraine joining NATO from Russia? Dmitry Medvedev, the alcoholic in chief over there. Thank you, Martin, for the heart. Medvedev, who was the former president, former prime minister, and basically was a big liberal, was a big moderate, and now is a lunatic far right nuclear war guy. He issued this statement that was kind of funny because it was, oh boy, if Ukraine joins NATO, then we're going to be really mad. And NATO, I'm paraphrasing, NATO will see what happens then. And it was like, I mean, what's going to happen then? You're suddenly going to attack NATO and then we'll go to war and we win? Or you attack NATO, we go to war and we all die because there's a nuclear holocaust. You're going to start a nuclear holocaust? Why would you do that? Because you die. There's no reason for you to do it. So it was classic Russia being Russia again. And somebody, oh, you know what? I've got the statement because somebody issued a great, I know what it was. Somebody did a wonderful tweet today. And the tweet was making fun of the Russians because the Russian foreign ministry, this was great. The Russian foreign ministry responding to Sweden joining NATO. And basically all they could do was put out a meme. Oh, this was it. This is Eto Buziashvili, great Georgian name, former advisor to the National Security Council of Georgia. And she shows the Russians put out a tweet talking about how, well, we conquered Swedish territory 400 years ago. And I mean, literally, that was their response today. Their response today was to say, we captured Swedish territory 400 years ago. And her response, which I thought was brilliant, was this is the kind of response Russia is capable of once a country is a NATO member, nothing more. Basically saying that that's exactly it. All Russia can do is bluster and make insults. Moose and squirrel. Exactly. No, it's really, I mean, in any case, whatever. Let me see here. You know what? I'm going to do a quick pitch for our subscription services and then go on and tell you, let's see. Actually, I'm going to tell you the polls really quick for Ukraine joining NATO in Ukraine, because I thought that was interesting and why, and then we'll go on. One of the ways I sort of ask folks to support my work, if you can afford it, if you can, if not, don't worry about it, is I've got a number of subscription services that allow you to basically become a donor on a monthly basis, just like public television, right? Where you can give each month, and most of the money goes to me, which is good, because I do the show every day, Monday to Friday. I work all day long, preparing it, and this is all I do. This is my job. I decided over a year ago when the war broke out, I was going to do this full time, and I've been able to do it because of the gifts you guys provide. Thank you, Lise, by the way, speaking of which, the gift on TikTok. In the aggregate, these things actually add up. The gifts on TikTok, the super chat, super stickers, the subscriptions you guys do, the auctions we do on Discord, it all adds up and has basically been able to pay my bills. Thank you very much, guys. So one of the ways I pitch for you guys to do that, to help out, is to go to a couple different services. You've got your choice, and basically sign up as a monthly member if you can afford it. $7.99 a month, something like that. On YouTube, it's very easy. You can become a YouTube membership by hitting the $ at the bottom of the comment box on YouTube. Thank you, Magical. The $ at the bottom of the comments on YouTube, and it gives you a membership option. You'll notice a few of the members have green names, at least on my screen. They're green. Greg and Brendy and others. That means they're monthly subscribers, by the way. Thank you, too, for that. And it's a way of supporting my work, and you become a monthly subscriber, which in my VIP, my Discord community, which has other benefits I'll talk about later. For you guys on TikTok, you can become TikTok subscribers. That's one way. You can also become paid subscribers on TikTok. I mean, you can also go to Ko-fi. It's the address is ko-fi.com/Aravosis. You can find the link on TikTok in my bio. Go to the Linktree link, click it. First thing that comes up is Ko-fi, and it's another service you can use to give monthly payments, monthly contribution. If you do, thank you, Lise, if you sign up monthly on Ko-fi, you will also be a VIP member of my Discord community, which gives you access to our Saturday morning show that I do, where we just hang out, those of us who are the subscribers, and also to our VIP auction, which again, I'll talk about the auctions a little bit later. But basically, it's a way of supporting my work. I always try to get maybe one or two folks, if I can, per show to consider at least signing up. Thank you. Who was that? Obi-Wan. Oh, Obi-Wan. That's cute. Obi-Wan. If you can, just because I'm just hoping it's like, it basically runs like Patreon, except Patreon got kind of evil, but I do have a Patreon link up too. But Patreon's kind of evil. They've gotten very bad on the Ukraine stuff, but I have it up. If you want to use Patreon, go ahead, but I can't use Patreon to give you the VIP membership. They've told me that. So you can only use Patreon to support my journalism. Thank you, Jen, for that. Any case, so go check it out, guys. On TikTok, go to the link in my profile, click it. First thing that comes up is Ko-fi. Use it, monthly membership. You guys maybe use the subscriptions for YouTube, or the rest of you, Ko-fi as well, which is in the comments or the bottom of my screen. Thank you for posting it, Syndicate and others. All right, let me keep going here. So Ukraine, poll of Ukrainians. A survey shows that a total of 89% of Ukrainians want their country to become a member of NATO, with the figure ranging from 93% in Western regions and 79% in Ukraine's East. The thing is that 79% in Ukraine's East means in the part of Ukraine that speaks Russian. This is the part that the Russians told us, because they speak Russian, they're really Russians. They're not Ukrainians. They don't like Ukraine. They don't like Ukrainians. They don't think of themselves as Ukrainians. They think of themselves as Russians. 79% of the Ukrainians who allegedly think of themselves as Russians, they don't, of course, that the Russians claim, 79% of them want Ukraine to join NATO, because they see themselves as an independent country and they basically fear Russia. I mean, this shouldn't surprise us, but I think it's important because the disinformation that the bad guys put out is always making these kind of claims about Ukraine. Oh, I saw it the other day. I forgot who it was the other day. Well, they speak Russian. They must be Russian. And it's like, well, I speak English. Go figure that. And I'm American. I'm not British. All right. What else we got here? Wagner update. Oh, this is fun too. So Wagner, there was a lot of news this weekend and today. The Wagner group are the paid mercenaries that tried to overthrow Putin, right? And Reuters has a story that literally, I think it just came out right before the show started, which was wild. Reuters has a story out that Prigozhin and his troops got pretty close to getting a nuclear weapon, one of Russia's nuclear weapons. They probably couldn't have used it, but they got pretty close to getting it. Now, Reuters says that, let me just see this, that basically there was, what was it? Oh yeah, videos. According to videos posted online and interviews with local residents, there was a contingent of the Wagner group that when one group was going up to, was going north, right? To go to Moscow, this other group veered off and started going, thank you, Ronald, to a military base, a Russian army base that housed nuclear weapons. Now, we'd all heard that there were nuclear weapons in the area. Actually, what's interesting about this, thank you, Ronald, we had heard there were nukes in the area, and we heard that, remember, there was that rumor that Prigozhin's troops had gotten nukes. They did not get the nukes, but they got close, which is probably why the rumor was out there. Thanks again, Ronald, for that. And what happened was, so Reuters says, looking at the videos online and talking to witnesses, it's clear that there was an offshoot of troops. Thank you, Andy and Ronald, that there was sort of a contingent that went a different way. It's clear they were going in the direction of the base that had nukes. But then when they got 100 kilometers from the base, excuse me, thank you, Ronald, 100 kilometers from the base, or 60 miles, Reuters lost track of them. Well, then, according to Budanov, well, let me tell you this. Oh, sorry. It's a nuclear base, Voronezh 45. Western officials have repeatedly said that Russia's nuclear stockpile was never in danger during the uprising. Today, Ukraine's head of military intelligence, Budanov, comes out and says Prigozhin got this close to getting a nuclear weapon. Thank you, Ronald. He says that they reached the nuclear base and that their intention was to acquire a small Soviet-era nuclear devices in order to raise the stakes in their mutiny. I'm reading this from Reuters. The only barrier between the Wagner fighters and nuclear weapons, Budanov said, were the doors to the nuclear storage facility. Quote, the doors of the storage were closed and they didn't get into the technical section. So in other words, they couldn't get into the storage facility because they basically didn't have the keys or they didn't have the codes to get in. But otherwise, they got to the location of the nukes, the facility they were in, and were unable to get them because they were right outside. Now, Western officials claimed none of this happened, right? Remember, they said, oh, there was no danger, no risk. Thank you, Ronald. Reuters talks to some more people. A source close to the Kremlin with military ties corroborated part of Budanov's account. Thank you, Ronald. A Wagner contingent managed to get into a zone of special interest, the Russians are calling this, as a result of which the Americans got agitated because nuclear munitions are stored there. Thank you, Dawn. A source in Russian-occupied East Ukraine with knowledge of the matter said this caused concern in the Kremlin and provided impetus for a hastily negotiated end to the rebellion on the evening of June 2nd. Now, that gets very interesting. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Nate. We've all been asking ourselves, why the hell did Putin, why was Putin willing to negotiate, right? And why did Prigozhin sort of call everything off? I think to some degree, Prigozhin called everything off because Putin was willing to negotiate. Putin was like, okay, what do you want? I'll do it. And also Prigozhin, I think, also realized he was a bit of what's the thing about the dog that catches the tail of the, I don't know if the dog or there's some saying about catching the tail of a lion or whatever the hell it is. Like, be careful trying to catch the tail of a lion because you might just catch it. And then what do? I think to some degree, Prigozhin wasn't quite sure what he was going to do. If he were to actually capture the Ministry of Defense, then what does he do? Or the dog that catches the car. Thank you. Exactly. Right. Like, what do you do once you catch it? This story, we don't know if this is true. I mean, we know there's evidence pointing to it. We know there are various sources that suggest it did happen. And we know that Putin's behavior was awfully suspicious, right? Why the hell would he have been willing to negotiate with Prigozhin and not just try to take the guy out? The fact that Prigozhin may have been this close to getting nukes would be one good reason. Now, it is widely believed that he couldn't have used the nukes. The Reuters piece says the nukes would have been in multiple pieces or something. They would have had to be assembled. I know I also read previously about Russian nuclear weapons that there's some kind of a redundant system or whatever where I don't know if you need two people, but there's a whole process so that one person can't just break in and get the nuke and set it off, right? There's a process you have to go through that could stop it. The thing is, here's what gets interesting. If Prigozhin were able to get the nuke, there's no way. If you were inside government, whether it's Russia, America, or any other government, and Prigozhin got the nuke and claimed, my men assembled it and we know how to use it. How do I want to say this? You're going to, internally, your experts are going to tell you there's no way he could have assembled it and there's no way he can set it off. But at the same time, if he claims he did, you've got to take the threat seriously. And if this story is true, Prigozhin did have something on Putin, because also if he gets a nuke, by the way, he could sell it to somebody too, right? I mean, just because you have a nuke doesn't mean you have to blow it up. You spirit it away and all of a sudden there's a rogue nuke. This is the stuff of Hollywood movies. There's a rogue nuke flying around Russia, waiting for some scientist who does know how to put it together, right? I mean, it's pretty wild. Anyway, wild story. Putin, the other wild story today about Wagner, Putin met with Prigozhin 5 days after the insurrection, 5 days after the coup. According to Putin's spokesman, thank you, Sean, Prigozhin got together with a number of his top commanders and Putin. And, of course, Putin's spokesman was like, oh, and they all got together and said that they support Putin and this kind of stuff. Yeah, sure they did. That to me is yet another sign of weakness. I mean, the very idea. It's bad enough that Putin said this man's a traitor and he needs to be stopped and and then he turns around and negotiates with the traitor. Then he sits down and meets with the traitor and all of his men 5 days later. Putin, I saw one guy today on CNN who was a former, whether he was an ambassador to the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe or whatever, but sort of a UN agency kind of affiliate. It's hard to explain what it is actually, but former U.S. ambassador, and he was saying he still thinks Putin and Prigozhin are playing a game here. That basically all of this didn't happen because Prigozhin got one up on Putin. He thinks they sort of plotted this whole thing out, and they're still plotting right now, like they're getting together in the meeting. My problem with that is I think all of this makes Putin look really bad, and this coup did not strengthen Putin's position in Russia. It didn't make him look like a strong man. It made Putin look weaker, and it made it look like if you stand up to Putin and try to kill him, he's going to work a deal with you. He's not going to try to kill you. He's not going to try to beat you. That makes other people want to stand up to Putin, right? And even more so, and 5 days later, rather than throwing you off a balcony or giving you poison tea, Putin's going to invite you to the Kremlin for and have a nice little meeting with tea and cookies with you, which is what he did. Now, the reason we've talked about a lot is the Wagner Group is very important. It's still 25,000 men. It's some of Russia's best, if not Russia's best men. Putin needs them not just because of Ukraine, but also because of the power he projects around the world in Africa and the Middle East. He uses these troops to work for governments in all of those countries, not all, but in a number of countries in those region. Thank you, Ash. They've even got, in return for them doing these contracts in Africa, they've got something like $1 billion in mineral rights or something, a crazy amount of mineral rights that they've taken in exchange for the work they're doing. So this is really important to Putin as a money and as an investment and as a power investment as well. So it could be why. Nonetheless, I don't think it makes Putin look good. Russian war dead. New study by independent Russian media outlets Mediazona and Meduza estimate that Russian losses are 8 times greater than officials are willing to admit, putting them possibly at 50,000 as the new estimate. Thanks, Ash, again for that. The number. The British Ministry of Defense, I think, a couple months ago said 40 to 60,000 Russian dead. That number sounds about right. We were also, I think, NATO officials were saying a couple months ago that the Russian total casualties, which are dead and wounded combined, total casualties were like 200, 220,000. And I think we were always thinking maybe a third of those were deaths. So a third of those might be 70,000 instead of 50, but it's still the same ballpark. Now, as far as what that means and why that matters, Russia's war in Afghanistan, 10 years long. Thank you, Crazy American, for the gift. Russia's war in Afghanistan that was 10 years long, and a war that just destroyed the Soviet Union. I mean, absolutely destroyed the Soviet Union because it went so poorly. So many men died. They lost 14,500 men over 10 years, 14,500. They've lost 50,000 at least over the last year, right? Just to put it in context. This was wild too. British military intelligence said over the weekend that up to 50% of Russia's military deaths, the deaths in Ukraine in the Russian military, were unnecessary. That basically, because they didn't have the proper equipment and they didn't get to the troops in time, half of the men who died didn't have to die. They would have been saved had the military done their job. Now, this is something that people had said from the beginning, that there weren't supplies. We were getting stories from the beginning. I remember one of them was intercepts of Russian troops talking and saying how, like, they've got a unit of 300 men. Every single man had frostbite on his feet. And the only thing the doctor had to give them were like Band-Aids, bandages. And they only had bandages for 150 men. And he had nothing else to give them for frostbite. Said, that's, nothing I can do. And they also, there was a lot of talk about the golden hour, I think it's called in the military, but basically the idea that the first hour after a soldier is seriously wounded or critically wounded is critical to whether that soldier will live or die. The very first hour is when you've got to get to them and give them that. Basically, if how do I want to phrase this? If you have somebody who is going to die but can be saved, let's put it that way, that first hour is critical in deciding whether they die or live. And the Russians were terrible about getting to these men. And frankly, it's almost like they didn't even care. But anyway, more studies are now showing that that's true, which is really sad. A Russian bomb hit a school distributing humanitarian aid in the southern town of Orikhiv in Zaporizhia province, killing 4 people. Turkish company Baykar has started constructing a factory in Ukraine to produce Bayraktar drones. Germany's Rheinmetall plant will also open a facility in Ukraine within the next 12 weeks to build and repair tanks. The plant would be able to produce up to 400 new Panther tanks per year. And I was reading this because I was wondering about this, like, how do you build plants in Ukraine that don't get blown up? But the representative for Rheinmetall said, there's lots of military plants operating in Ukraine. They don't get blown up. You just have to have the security, and we will have the security. I don't know. But somehow they plan on doing it, because it sounds crazy to me. Like, why wouldn't you keep the plant in Turkey or something, right? But nonetheless, both of them say they can do it. Thank you, Mike, for that. Both of them say they can do it and they can keep the plant open. Final two stories over the weekend. Ukraine admitted that they did, in fact, attack the Kerch Bridge. Remember, the Kerch Bridge was the bridge in southern Ukraine that got blown up last maybe October or so by a car bomb, or we believe it was a car bomb. Thank you, adventurers. Well, the Ukrainians finally admitted this weekend it was them, which was interesting. And a former commander of the Russian Black Sea Fleet submarine Krasnodar, which is the sub that fired the missiles at Vinnytsia in Western Ukraine, all the way over here, almost a year ago. The anniversary is right about now. The Russians attacked this town. Remember, they hit the town square and they killed that little girl. There was a little girl with Down syndrome who was there with her mother. And I think the girl might have even had her baby in a little carriage and was pushing it and just killed them. And there were these horrible pictures of everybody, and you could see the girl's feet. I mean, it was just horrific. This commander was the commander of the submarine that launched those missiles. He was jogging recently and ended up with 4 bullets in him, and he's dead while jogging in Russia. Now, clearly, I mean, this comes across as a hit. Somebody put a hit on him. In other words, this was an assassination. This was not him getting robbed. Could it have been the Ukrainians? Absolutely. What is going to be interesting is, and I've seen more and more talk itself up, or maybe I should say Russia is setting Ukraine up to be the new Mossad. Basically, the Israelis, where you screw with them and they will come after you 30 and 40 and 50 years later, and they will find you and they will kill you. And that's what the Ukrainians are turning into, being able to blow up the bridge, being able to do these attacks in Russia. And we've been hearing about all these plants blowing up and people getting blown up. By the way, the assassination attempts in Russia, most of them worked, by the way, that seem to have been the Ukrainians as well. They're operating like the Israelis, and they're doing a very good job of it. And I would not be surprised when this war ends that Ukraine doesn't have a very long list of sort of vendettas it needs to catch up with. Anyway, very interesting. All right, guys, let's switch over and do questions. On TikTok, you can submit questions on the screen. You guys can do them here. Let me do a quick show of just a couple things. We do have an auction. I was telling you guys earlier, for folks who sign up, thank you, Trisha, for folks who sign up for the YouTube membership, which I very much appreciate if you would, like Brendy and Greg there, thank you guys. You become a VIP member of our auctions. The same thing happens if you sign up at Ko-fi. Thank you. Who is that? Hickey and Vicky? Hickey and Vicky. That was cute. The same thing happens at Ko-fi, which you can find that link in my bio on TikTok. Click the Linktree links. First thing that comes up is Ko-fi, and you become a monthly member. It makes you a VIP member in our Discord. What does that mean? That means that we have 2 different auctions, one for the public and one for VIP. And the VIP auction is only for folks who are contributors, just to give them a thank you. Well, some of the stuff we've got in the auctions, I'll show you. We've got like 9 items this week. I won't show you all of them. Cool Ukrainian military patch. Now, this one's interesting. This is the Ukrainian flag, but of course, it's the wrong colors, right? It's green. The Ukrainian flag is blue and gold. I asked Vlad back in Ukraine what the deal was. Thank you, Phil, for the super sticker. What the deal was with this. And Vlad said snipers. Basically, if you are operating at night, or in an environment where you want to be really careful and not have snipers see you, you don't want a big yellow patch on your shirt. You put this on instead to, as it knocks down, to represent Ukraine. But exactly, it's a low, Wild Hunt says low visibility. It's a low visibility patch. Very interesting. Yes, you also, Groovy Mander, I forgot to mention that. Thank you, Mike, for the gift there. You also can, on Twitch, become a subscription through Prime on Twitch, and you would do that through my Aravosis account on Twitch, not the Aravosis Report Daily, which is the account you guys are watching now, but my Aravosis account. That would be great. 2 other things. Very cute little Patron the dog button. Samantha, thank you. Sorry, Samantha just signed up to become a new member on YouTube. Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate that. Cool little Patron the dog. Patron's a mind-sniffing dog and very popular in Ukraine. He almost got hurt the other day. He was in some kind of a little altercation with whether the Russians were bombing nearby or something. He was fine, but I was reading about it like, Anyway, Patron's mind-sniffing dog. They've got really cute pin. We've got a lot of Patron stuff. And finally, I won't go through the whole story, but this is a piece of this is the container, a piece of a Russian helicopter that was shot down the first day of the war at the Hostomel Air Base, which is right north of Kyiv. The Ukrainians made a nice little thing for it. That's the piece of it's the piece of the Russian helicopter. That's the back. They made it into a little like token that says, Target destroyed. It has the location exactly. It was a Ka-52 Alligator. It's really neat. It's really neat. This thing I love. And on the front of it, you see Ukraine, and then the same thing, the target. Oh, and I love this. And a QR code where if you scan the code, it opens up the video on YouTube of the Russian helicopter getting shot down. Now, that battle was huge because this was the battle north of Kyiv in the first days of the war. That had the Ukrainians lost that battle, they very well could have lost Kyiv, their capital, is sort of what the defense experts say. So winning this battle was a huge victory for Ukraine, and it set the entire stage. Thank you, adventurers. It set the entire stage for the war going on as long as it's gone, because had they lost Kyiv, that could have been the end of everything. So pretty cool. This was from the first day that this helicopter got shot down, and it was, you could argue this was the most important victory of the war to date. Anyway, this was a gift from a children's hospice that we raised money for, which was also kind of neat. They wanted to thank us for raising money for them, for the kids, and they gave us a couple of these. Vlad kept one, I kept one, of course. Anyway, so this is one of the other items. All right, I'll stop hawking the auctions. You can go to discord.aravosis.com. So thank you. Yeah, Groovy, don't worry about it. Exactly. If you can help with Prime, that's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, guys. Latest news on the nuclear plant. Nothing in the last few days. The nuclear plant has not been in the news in the last few days. You'll remember the concern was that the Russians were going to blow up the nuclear plant. It clearly hasn't blown up, and hopefully this means that, you know, it's less of a threat, but it's not been in the news at all. No. What else we got, guys? Questions. More questions. Actually, I'm sure I still cannot answer the super chat questions. Let me look really quick on TikTok. I'm sure I can't. TikTok made it so, yeah, I still can't TikTok. We don't know yet. Sobo's asking, for the Wagner troops, who are the mercenary troops that tried the coup, stationed worldwide, do they need to resign or join the Russian military? Okay, that's a fascinating question. What I am assuming that the Wagner troops have got to sign on with the Russian Ministry of Defense. The Russian Ministry of Defense said that all the Wagner troops in Ukraine had to sign on. They basically had to sign up a new contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense, which basically would make them like regular Russian troops rather than just the mercenaries, which also could mean that their salaries would go down and their benefits would go down significantly, because regular Russian troops don't make nearly the money that the Wagner guys do, the mercenaries. But I never thought about that, and I haven't read whether the same rule about having to sign up applies to the Wagner troops worldwide. I would think it applies worldwide. I would think. Unless Putin's a little afraid. Marcus, let it go. It's not pronounced Ukraine. Can I just say, I always get a chuckle out of people who try to tell me Ukraine's pronounced Ukraine, not Ukraine. Actually, it's pronounced Ukraini or Ukraina or whatever. It's not pronounced Ukraine. So we're going to haggle over how you're actually trying to correct how Americans incorrectly and the Brits incorrectly say Ukraine. You want me to say it your incorrect way rather than my incorrect way? And by the way, there's two ways of saying Ukraine in English, Ukraine or Ukraine. And both are wrong because that's not the name of the country. So, give it a rest. One more word, and I want the mods to take that guy out. Because that's an obnoxious comment. It's just an obnoxious thing to write. We're sitting here talking about the war and trying to figure out how we can help people, and you're worrying about like pronunciation. I just think it's obnoxious. No, but it's rude. Why would you do that? It's just somebody trying to be a dick. Any case, Malayathos, thank you for that. What else we got here? Russians are targeting sappers, and Patron was in Kelly's saying Russians are targeting sappers. I don't know what a sapper is. Somebody. And Patron was in an attack. This is the dog. His human picked him up to carry him to a shelter, but one person was killed and 4 injured. It happened June 5th. Okay. Well, I had heard it was a serious attack and that he got away, but that's what I'd read. Okay. Wow. Any word on the latest for the F-16s and long-range missiles? Zero. There was another rumor this weekend that, okay, Nestor, keep it one more word. Keep an eye on Nestor, because Nestor just made a Russian cheer, Nestor Munoz. One more word and block him, unless he was somebody that perhaps was trying to be nice. But whenever you see mods, folks that write the "ura," it is something that the U.S. Marines say, but not in this context. Patron is a sapper. I don't know what a sapper is. What is a sapper? Just to tell folks here really quick. Demolition experts? Charlie says demolition expert. Oh, that would make sense actually, because Patron is a demolition expert. He goes and sniffs out the bombs and the mines and things. Okay, anti-mine. Okay, so it is demining. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kelly. Angel's going to get its wings on this one. We do have a lot of Russian trolls today, don't we? Well, actually, we should have a lot of Russian trolls. Think about it. The Sweden thing just blew up in their face, right? Sweden is one step away from joining NATO now. They just to remind folks, if anybody came late, they're waiting for Hungary. Hungary is being a pain as well. Turkey came along finally and said, okay, we'll let them join. Hungary's being difficult. They're the last one. But Hungary, as recently as last week, said if Turkey ends up coming along and saying they want Sweden to join NATO, we'll agree to. So this could be it. And I mean, Sweden joining NATO, I guarantee you, Putin is on the phone with Orban in Hungary right now, begging him not to do this. I guarantee you. But the Azov guys got released. The Azov commanders went back to Ukraine. They had like a big celebration in Ukraine, the whole thing. Oh, Russia's not going to be happy about that. So I'm sure we're going to have more trolls as a result. What else? More questions. Correct. Aiden, Hungary said they wouldn't be the last to ratify. Exactly. And their foreign minister came out last week and reiterated that, which was great. So that's good. Hopefully it stays that way, you know? The F-16s. Yeah, that was it. The F-16, the long range missiles. Nothing, zero. We are waiting for Biden to approve training for the F-16s, and we are waiting for Biden to approve the ATACMS. Somebody was passing kind of the lie on Twitter, and this is this account with 250,000 followers. And this guy, for the second time, tweets that the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Biden is about to approve ATACMS. It's on his desk and waiting for his approval. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. It said nothing of the kind. He claimed it a week ago. It was a lie. He claimed it again yesterday. It was a lie. So yeah, there's no news. Like zero news. Cluster bombs? I mean, what about them? It may be all over the UK news, but they're going to Ukraine. So, I mean, I'm kind of like, I don't care. Not in a bad way, but just, you know, British news doesn't like cluster bombs. Oh, well, they don't have to use them, you know? Are fronts moving or standing still? The Russians had a little movement today. I think it was in the last day near Crimea, maybe. Over the last few days, the Ukrainians have been moving ahead slowly. They've been moving ahead near Bakhmut, like south of Bakhmut, but it's been slow. The Russians, two different times I've heard the Russians moving ahead a little, but the Ukrainians have been doing better than the Russians in terms of moving ahead, but it's slow. It's very slow. My thoughts on the cluster bomb, you know what? A couple different things. One, if Ukraine needs it, if Ukraine says they need it, they need it. That's my first thing. People who say, oh, it wouldn't benefit them. That's the same BS we heard about the F-16s and everything else. Their generals are smart people. They're NATO trained, and their generals say they need it. Second of all, Russia's been using them since the war started. That doesn't mean Ukraine should do what Russia does, but it's an argument that helps to a degree. Third, Ukraine's running low on ammunition, artillery. They have since the war started. Artillery has been a problem since the war started, and these cluster munitions can take the place of artillery. That's important. Four, I'm going to miss what step I'm at here, but I think four, one of the big problems Ukraine faces right now with the counteroffensive, or I should say the big problem Ukraine faces with the counteroffensive and why it's going slow, is the Russians are dug in. Because we dragged our feet forever in terms of promising Ukraine new weapons and then getting them the weapons, right? We promised them American tanks in January. The American tanks may not come till next year. We promised them F-16s last month. We haven't even approved training for the F-16s, and the training could go 6 to 8 months. So every time we promise something, it goes very slowly. Well, because of that, Russia had ample time to dig in, and its troops are now literally dug in. And the Ukrainians need to find some way of undigging them. And one really good way, many experts, not all, but many experts say, are cluster bombs. Now, the big concern with cluster bombs, again, the way Russia uses them, big surprise, Russia just drops them on civilians because that's what Russia does. Russia wants to kill civilians. It's not a glitch, it's a feature. In other words, they don't kill civilians by accident. The whole goal is to kill civilians when Russia does it. what Ukraine doesn't want and what the world doesn't want, which is why a number of countries, like 100 plus countries, have banned cluster bombs, is actually, I should have said what they are. Anybody who doesn't know, you basically got, imagine a shell, like a bullet, but a big bullet flying through the air. And inside that bullet are 100 little bombs. It opens up and the 100 bombs fall to earth and they go off. And of course, since they're falling on the ground, they can fall all over the place, right? And they fall over the place. And imagine, especially if you've got Russian troops spread out in a bunch of trenches, you can hit hopefully a large area of the trench with these bomblets falling everywhere, right? The problem is a percentage of the bombs don't go off. And then you've got these little bombs sitting on the ground waiting for someone to pick them up or step on them and they go off. Well, children are often the people who find them after a war, right? Because after the war, they're still active and they're little pieces of metal, shiny, and a child picks them up and gets killed or at least loses their hand or whatever. So it can be horrible. The problem is, it's Ukraine has a choice. They can either lose their entire country or they can put some children at risk after the war ends from cluster bombs. Yes, which is bad. But the children are going to be worse off if the country gets wiped out and the Russians take over, as we've seen. So with the brutal war crimes and everything else. So I feel like, yeah, it sucks, but I don't think they have a choice. And as I've said before, thank you, Randy, if this were my country the Russians were doing this to, I would be doing a lot worse than cluster bombs to stop the Russians. There'd be very few things that I wouldn't consider doing. Actually, the only things, thank you, Christine, the only stuff I wouldn't do would be stuff that I deemed it was counterproductive to do. But I wouldn't have any moral or ethical compunctions about anything if my country were being destroyed like Ukraine is. No way. I'd be the one going, moral, right? We need to live. Well, but the problem with nuclear is you'd say, okay, but if we use nukes, Ukraine doesn't have nukes, but if Ukraine had nukes and they use nukes, then the Russians use nukes, so we all die. So there'd be a good efficacy argument as to why you wouldn't use nukes. It just wouldn't work. But to me, it's an argument of whether it would work. I'm not going to go through details of what I'd use, but trust me, if the Russians invaded America, I would not be the guy arguing for, it wouldn't be right if we used this weapon to stop them from committing genocide. Same thing with the Nazis for that matter. You're not going to find me the guy going, we should have been a little nicer to the Nazis and not, firebombed. But nonetheless, more questions. What else we got, guys? Well, and right. And it's Ukraine. There's another point too. Somebody just said Ukraine using it against Ukrainians, so to speak, meaning using it in Ukraine. This is the government of Ukraine deciding that in order to liberate its own country, they are willing to use these weapons on their own land, right? That's a lot different than we're going into another country and we're bombing you and we're using these weapons that your children. Ukraine is in a better position to make the decision of what is best for Ukrainian children than the French, the Brits, the Americans, or anybody else, or the United Nations, right? And it's the Ukrainian government that deems that this is the best way to do it, right? So, or W.C. Field says 200,000 children are missing now. How many would be hurt? No, I don't like to compare how many would be hurt from clusters because I don't want to say like it's okay if you get hurt from cluster bombs, right? But, would you stop short of going a small nuke? There's nothing I wouldn't use if the Russians were doing this to my country. My only thing is, and I have always said this in politics, that I've worked in politics a long time, you have to have a strategy in place for what you're doing. Now, it could be a war strategy. It could be a marketing strategy, a political activism strategy. But I have a big problem. Let's take this out of the war context. Political activists. When political activists do stupid things like throwing ketchup at the Mona Lisa or whatever all these stupid environmental kids are doing, I get upset because to me, there's a thing in vogue, certainly among lefty activists, certainly, where they think we made you uncomfortable and that's the goal. And I'm like, no, the goal isn't to make people uncomfortable. The goal is actually to help the climate or the goal is to help gay people or help transgender people or help black people. It's not to make people uncomfortable. And if your tactic is to do something that just pisses people off and turns them against you, then it doesn't work. So whether you're talking about using a tactical nuke, like you were saying, somebody was saying, or whether in terms of a war fighting scenario, or whether we're talking about in terms of climate change, kids throwing ketchup at masterpieces, to me, I will consider any tactic if you can prove to me that it will have the desired benefit, that it will help us achieve the result we want to achieve. And if you can't prove to me, or if I can show that it's going to be counterproductive, then I'm not going to do it. So using nukes would probably be counterproductive, because if we use nukes against the Russians, they use nukes against us, So nukes would probably not work as well. But I wouldn't have any problem if my country, the Russians were doing to America what they're doing to Ukraine, and they were taking over our towns and killing people and wanting to wipe out America and committing genocide. I wouldn't have any problem with any of these weapons if we thought these weapons would achieve the goal. So, but in any case, cluster bombs aren't nukes. So, what else we got, guys? What else? More questions. I didn't mean to get into that whole thing, though. Yeah. Greta Thunberg has said good stuff, though. She was in Ukraine recently, and she said some very good stuff. She was talking about how the war was affecting the environment, but I was very impressed because she was talking about how the Russians were destroying the environment through this war. And I was afraid when I heard she's the big young Swedish, I think, environmental activist. I was afraid when I heard she was going to Ukraine that she was going to basically blame both sides for the environmental carnage. And no. She was very specific about how the Russians caused this war and the Russians are destroying the environment. So she was good. No, she was very good. Yeah. Yep. Medvedev did talk today. Yeah. People asking him. He went off about Sweden joining NATO and threatened, Ukraine joining NATO. He threatened if Ukraine joins NATO, there will be very bad consequences. And it was just like, oh, come on. Go away. Andy, I don't know what you mean. $200 hitting the Kerch Bridge? I don't know what that means. I did see that the Ukrainians admitted this weekend that they were the ones who hit the Kerch Bridge, which was the bridge in southern Ukraine that got blown up, connecting southern Ukraine to Russia that got blown up last fall. That we always suspected was the Ukrainians, but they finally admitted it was them, which is very interesting. Anyway, I'm not sensing a lot of questions from you guys today. Anything more? Has Wagner troops gone to Belarus? Not yet. No. They're supposed to as part of that deal. I'm not going to get into DeSantis because I'll talk about DeSantis in Ukraine, but I'm not going to talk about non-Ukraine topics with that. How do we get rid of Hungary? Well, if Hungary keeps it up, they can be kicked out of the EU and they can be kicked out of NATO. No, it's a good question. Hungary needs to ask itself why it's in NATO if the prime minister loves Putin so much. Really. But what else, guys? Ukraine announced the bridge this weekend. Ukraine announced it was some deputy defense. It was the woman who's often doing the briefings. I think she's like the deputy defense person. And she basically took credit for for Ukraine attacking the Kerch Bridge last fall. Yeah. The Chechens are reportedly getting sent to Bakhmut, I think, but nobody knows how. And they were supposedly going to get sent to Sumy too, or Belgorod, which was the region. Belgorod, I think, which is the region that those Russian those Russian turncoats or whatever they were, insurrectionists, were trying to invade Russia from. But I don't, Chechens. We don't know whether the Chechens can even fight. The Chechens like to they fight on behalf of Russia, but they like to basically film themselves and put it up on YouTube and TikTok. It's hilarious. And everyone calls them TikTok warriors because it's not clear they can even fight. But they're these like macho images on TikTok. And it's like, okay, whatever, right? The TikTok army. All right. Biden always has the nuclear codes with him. Yeah. You may not be, are you American, Groovy? You may not be American for saying that. But Groovy said Biden has the nuclear codes with him when he was in London. Did you guys see that? He always does. The president always has, we call it the nuclear football. It's a briefcase that a military aide has with them the whole time, handcuffed to his wrist, the whole time that he's with the president, so that no matter where the president is, he could launch a nuclear war if he had to. Yeah, so he's always got it with him. 2 briefcases? Oh, well, maybe it's 2 now. Well, or 1, maybe 1 is the football and 1, who knows? But yeah, he always travels with it. Yep. Um, I don't know. That's a good question, Wilson. Wilson says, what happens next if Hungary were to veto Sweden joining NATO? Hungary has said they aren't going to veto as of a week ago. So hopefully that still holds. Then again, Hungary said it when it didn't look like it was a possibility, when it looked like Turkey was still going to say no, right? If Hungary were to say no, I think I think you would look, knowing Biden, you'd see an effort to bribe Hungary. Knowing Congress, you would see an effort to sanction Hungary. I think you'd see a tax on Hungarian goods and things like that. I don't know what our economic relationship is with Hungary, to what degree the U.S. could hurt them, but Congress would not be nice if Hungary were, because Hungary is irrelevant as far as to NATO, I think, whereas Turkey is not irrelevant to NATO. But Hungary would face a huge backlash, certainly from, well, in Europe, hopefully too, but in the U.S., if we have any kind of economic relationship with Hungary that matters to them, I suspect, and Congress could affect it, Congress would destroy them. Now, Biden would have the ability to veto, so who knows? But let's just hope it doesn't go that far, Oh, hello, Sweden. What would it look like for Sweden if they join NATO? I don't know. I mean, probably not a lot different than right now. Sweden, apparently, I was reading about this today. Sweden is already acting as a de facto member of NATO. Thanks for that, Wilson. So they've already, NATO has been intentionally working with the Swedes and working closely with them. I don't know if Sweden's prime minister is going to actually be there in Vilnius. I thought I saw they may even be there, I think. So I don't know. Anyway. All right, guys. Let me do a quick recap, and then I think we'll go. Maybe we'll go to Discord for a little bit, because I have nothing, and I can tell the comments are kind of going slow here. Why? That was a question you guys were asking earlier. Why doesn't Ukraine totally destroy the Kerch Bridge? Okay, Kerch Bridge is bridge in southern Ukraine, down here, goes across the river here. Putin built it to connect southern Ukraine to Russia. Russia's over here. About a 12-mile or so, maybe 15-kilometer, whatever distance here. Putin bridge, and the Ukrainians blew it up last fall. The Russians at least fixed a lot of it. I don't know if they fixed all of it. And the question is why the Ukrainians haven't blown it up again. First of all, I suspect it takes a lot to blow the bridge up, because last time it looks like Ukraine used a suicide bomber to do it. Well, that, again, if you're using a suicide bomber, that means you needed a decent bomb to blow it up. At the time, Ukraine didn't have missiles that could work to do it, that were enough to do it. I don't know whether now they do. Like, they've got the British Storm Shadows. Sorry, guys. Ooh, I think it's my allergies and stuff doing this to me. The British Storm Shadows, I don't know if the British Storm Shadows are yet in range, or whether they're almost in range, right? But are the Storm Shadow cruise missiles close enough? They're out of range of the bridge is the first problem. Second of all, how many missiles would you need to take the bridge down? Okay, because we don't know how many they have. Finally, what was I going to say? I mean, that's actually finally, the final question is, we had heard at least that maybe Ukraine was leaving the bridge up because they wanted to give Russian troops a way to run. That basically, if they scare enough of the Russian troops might just flee. And if they flee, that's Russian troops fleeing to Russia is better than Russian troops getting pushed up against the water and fighting because they have nowhere to go. So that may also be why. That may be why. Because I agree with you. On its face, you'd think, why didn't they blow the bridge up again? And frankly, it would make sense to blow up the bridge to some degree too, because the Russians are bringing in a lot of supplies for all the fighting that's going on in the south. A lot of supplies and men are coming through the bridge there. So why wouldn't you blow it up? Obviously, Ukraine hasn't, which is why I still wonder whether there might be some kind of a technical reason why, and not just a tactical or not just a strategic reason, but whether there's a technical reason. For some reason, they don't have enough missiles or whatever, or the distance, I think. Um, Interesting. R1G is saying, I saw something about converting S-200 missiles to attack the bridge when they're ready, and they may not be ready. I mean, maybe, you know. All right, guys, I'm yawning. I keep yawning. I'm sorry. Oh, I think I woke up early again. Thank you, Daniel, for the gift there. Let me do my summary of the news, the stories we covered today, and then we can always jump to Discord for a little bit. Okay, I'll throw a pizza in the oven, my usual. All right. Let me do the summary of what we covered today. Day 501 of Putin's 3-day special military operation. Biden arrived in Vilnius, Lithuania for the NATO summit that starts tomorrow. Turkey agreed to let Sweden join NATO. We are still waiting to hear from Hungary, but Hungary did say a week ago that if Turkey came around, it would come around. So hopefully we are going to get Sweden joining any day now, which would be very cool. Erdogan really pissed off the sorry, making you yawn. I know Erdogan really pissed off Putin this weekend. Thank you. Oh, it's the crazy clowns, the scary clowns. Thank you, Nick. That reminds me of the clowns in the original Charmed TV show. There's this sort of scary clown in one scene, and that's like the way he dances. Erdogan also released 5 of the Azov battalion commanders who were being kept in Ukraine. Oh, Craig, what question? Oh, hang on, Craig. I didn't see it. Oh, sorry. Craig had a question I missed. Do you think, I saw it and then I forgot it. You're right. Do you think the Prigozhin mutiny still has some mileage to go? The thing with Prigozhin, this is the Wagner Group mercenaries, right? The thing that intrigued me was how all the Russia experts kept saying, this isn't over yet. And I kept wondering what they mean, and none of them were ever actually saying what they meant by it's not over yet. The fact that they met with Putin 5 days later and that he met with them sounds a little weak. Sounds like it's not over. The fact that Prigozhin, thank you, Nick. Oh, that Zeus is a nice one. I know that. And that's also, that's a really nice one. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. And keeping it Greek. We like that too. Thank you very much for that. That was a very generous one. The Prigozhin thing, how was I going to say? Something else I was thinking. The fact that he met with them, to me, was a sign of weakness. The fact that Prigozhin is still in Russia. Prigozhin's still in Russia. He's apparently not even in Belarus. He was in St. Petersburg before, and right now I believe he's in Moscow. I read today. He's just sort of thumbing his nose at Putin because the deal was he was going to go in exile in Belarus. And I kind of think it's one of those things, honestly, it reminds me of my obnoxious staff at the UN where my boss had told me before I went there, she said, they don't listen. Like you tell them to do stuff and they just won't do it. She goes, and you have no power to make them do it. And she's right. I mean, they would just literally be like, I don't want to work on that. Like, what do you mean you don't want to work on that? And I think Prigozhin's kind of the same way. Prigozhin may realize he's in a position where he can just turn to Putin and go, I know we said I was going to live in Belarus. I don't want to live in Belarus, so I'm staying here. And what's Putin going to do? Prigozhin's got something on Putin, whether it's simply because the Wagner Group is so important to Putin that he can't afford to have it be shut down, whether it's because the Wagner men are so loyal to Prigozhin that basically Prigozhin has his own private military that's better than the Russian military that has 25,000 men. But for whatever reason, Putin has never been able to say no to Prigozhin, and he's still not really being able to do it. So I don't know if the mutiny itself has some mileage, but if you're Putin, the guy is still there and his troops are still there and his troops are still loyal to you, right? So you should still be worried. Thank you, Jesse, for the meteors. I saw one analysis today, I don't know where, somewhere I was reading, that was saying that traditionally in Russia or the Soviet Union, when you had rebellions or some whiff of a rebellion like this, the leader would sack all the military chiefs just to be safe. Like, knock off, throw in jail everybody from the top of the military. Putin didn't do any of that. He didn't even go after the guy who did the coup himself or the top coup commanders. He met with the top coup commanders, right? So if you're Putin, you still have to worry that this could happen because basically the guy who tried to kill you or overthrow you, thank you, Nick. The guy who tried to overthrow you, thank you, Paul as well. He's still out there. He could try it again. So, but having said that, I'm not convinced the coup has mileage to go, but I feel like it ebbed. And now we're kind of waiting to see if the coup can get hot again. So I don't know that it's an ongoing coup, but I don't think it's over. Whether that's contradictory, I don't know. Anyway, sorry about that. I saw it. That's why I put the question up, because I saw it and then totally spaced out. Thank you, adventurers, for that. Putin's days are numbered. Watching from Guadalcanal. Oh, wow. Hey, Tiger. That's interesting. Tiger is over at Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal. We say Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal, to say it correctly. Solomon Islands. Wow. That's got to be, I don't even know what time it is. I'm going to guess. Oh, no, you're early. You're probably a lot earlier there, though. Okay, I'm going to guess here. 3. Are you like noon or 10 a.m. maybe? Just trying to guess here. You're probably even worse than Alaska. I'm going to go for 8. I'm going to go for 9 a.m. Midnight? Oh, forget it. It's midnight? Oh. Oh, are you across the date line? You're not across the date line, are you? Sorry, real quick here. I'm just curious for the Solomon Islands. Will Prigozhin disguises be popular? I know Prigozhin. I think Prigozhin might be too esoteric of something for Halloween, though, to go as Prigozhin. It'd be funny, though. Be very funny. Oh, it is across the date line. That's why. Okay. All right, guys. Let me do the quick. All right, now I'm going to do the summary. Thank you for the extra gifts, by the way, too. I will do the summary of the stories we covered today, and then we'll still go to Discord at least for a few minutes. Like I said, Turkey agreed to let Sweden join NATO. Erdogan decided to let the Azov battalion commanders free, which is sure to piss off Putin. We still are waiting to see what Ukraine gets out of the NATO summit. Supposedly, they're going to give them some kind of more expedited access to NATO or something. I'm not convinced. Tbilisi, wow, that's cool too. Thank you, Wrinkled. Appreciate you joining us. Biden was on, I was saying Biden was on CNN this weekend, being negative about Ukraine joining NATO, but that's kind of funny. I've got my paper in front of my face, and it's funny because this is one of the things like you see on the TV news when they've got a light from below. See, without the paper, with the paper, with the sun. But it's funny because the light from below can give you a nice glow. So I'm like noticing this with the lighting. It's making me laugh. Lighting is important. You learn these things when you do media. Lighting is very important. Let me find Wagner update. I just gave you the Wagner update, including Reuters had a very interesting story that the Wagner folks might have been very close to getting a nuclear weapon. They probably would not have been able to use it, but even just getting their hands on a nuke would have been a big deal. Find Putin met with Prigozhin and his senior commanders just 5 days after the coup. We learned that. Yes, Biden is in Vilnius, Lithuania, for the NATO summit that starts tomorrow. Russian war dead, possibly 50,000 Russians have died in the war, according to a new study. Per UK British military intelligence, up to 50% of Russian war dead were unnecessary, meaning their soldiers they could have saved. So they could have saved 25,000 soldiers had they basically done what they were supposed to do as far as military, sort of military first aid. A Russian bomb hit a school distributing humanitarian aid in the southern city of Orikhiv today. The Turkish company Baykar has started constructing a factory in Ukraine to produce Bayraktar drones. And Germany's Rheinmetall will also open a plant in Ukraine within 12 weeks to build and repair tanks. Stanislav Zutsky, RZHY. Oh my God, RZHY. Rzutsky, former commander of Russian Black Sea Fleet submarine Krasnodar, who fired the missiles that killed a number of people, including a little girl in Vinnytsia in Ukraine about almost a year ago now, was himself killed mysteriously, shot 4 shots to him, killing him while he was jogging, which looks like an assassination. Could have been the Ukrainians. And finally, over the weekend, Ukraine admitted that they did, in fact, hit the Kerch Bridge, that it was they who bombed the Kerch Bridge last year, which is very interesting. All right, guys, let's go to the Discord. I will go hang there for a little bit. Thank you for the gifts. You guys were great. Nick, that was especially generous, but I appreciate all of you guys and your generosity. The new YouTube subscriber and the super chat and super stickers and everything else. And Hazel, thank you for the last minute galaxy. And we'll go to our Discord and hang out a little bit. It's discord.aravosis.com and look for the, I think we call it John's After Party. We call it, that's sort of the top left section. and join us. And I'll be there in a minute. There's audio, so make sure you turn on the audio, but there's no video because it makes it easier for me not having video. And you guys can type and I'll have audio. All right. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow. It'll be 6 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you, Timothy, for the vote. And I'll be back 6 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be talking tomorrow. We'll definitely be talking about NATO because it'll be the first day of the NATO summit. I'll be curious to see what Hungary says about Sweden joining NATO. So, all right, guys, we'll sign off of you guys. See you at Discord. And you folks,